Welcome to the next lesson in the WiSys Form Studio video training series. Today we are going to create a new form with the bare minimum requirements to do an inventory receipt. We will continue to expand this form to make it more robust over the course of the next several videos. To get started, we're going to launch Form Studio, connect to our database, and then open our project that we created in a previous video. So we're going to add a new form. And also in a previous video, we discussed the various sections that you'll find in Form Studio. So I'm going to give our form a name, a description, and the details of these other fields will be covered in later videos. I am also going to assign an icon, and before I can do that, it needs to save the form, so I'm going to say yes. And we're doing a receipt, so I'm going to use the incoming arrow as my icon. Now that we have our form defined, we need to add some fields. So the minimum things that we need to do an inventory receipt are an item, a location, and a quantity. So I'm going to use the lookup variables on the forms for the item and the location because we want to be able to search the Macola database to find those if we don't know them. And then my quantity field is just going to be a regular text field. So over here is the section where I define the specifics to this field that I've added to my form. So I'm going to go ahead and give this is the variable name used throughout the form for this field on the form. So a WiSys standard is if it's a text field to give it a txt prefix. And then this is my item field. And my caption for the field is going to be item. My lookup SQL is not necessary. It is to build a more robust form, but it's not a requirement. And I'm not going to perform any actions at this time. So I think that's it for this field. So now I'm going to move down to the next one. And this is my location. And again, none of these other values are relative. So I'm going to move down to my last field on my form, which is my quantity field. And my enable flag needs to be true so that you can enter data into it. And isNumeric is also going to be true because it's a numeric value. And I'm going to leave everything else the way it is. Now to transact on this, we have fields defined that will capture the minimum that we need for an inventory receipt. But now we also need a button so that the user can press the button to cause the transaction to take place. So the buttons are defined at the bottom. So again, a WiSys standard is to prefix the variable with btn for button. And then this is my receive button. My caption is going to be receive. An enabling element is the button will be disabled until an element has been filled in. So I'm going to set this to the quantity, so you're not going to be able to press the button until you've entered a quantity. And then the action is where you define what's going to happen when the button is pushed. So I'm going to click the ellipsis here, and these are the various actions that you can put on a transaction. In this case, we're going to do a Macola business transaction. So I'm going to click that, and up pops the list of all available transactions that can be programmed in Form Studio. So I am looking for the inventory receipt, which is right here, receipt, and you can see the description says inventory transaction receipt. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and click next. And now these are the properties of the object. and it wants us to pass this information from our form to the object so the object can do the transaction in the Macola database. So these properties, not every property is required, and I happen to know the ones that are. So the cost is a required field. But you'll notice that we did not capture the cost or get data for that on the form. That's because if you enter a -1 for a cost or a price anywhere in Form Studio or with any WiSys object, WiSys will automatically use the default cost that is set up in Macola. So this receipt is automatically going to go to the default inventory receipt account that's been established in Macola by using because we're using a -1 here. Next, I'm going to map over my item number from my form, then my location from my form, and then my quantity from my form. And then it's probably a good idea to add a username, and any variable that you see that starts with @ those variables are available to every form created in Form Studio. So I'm going to use this @ current username so that we can know who did our transaction. Then I'm going to click Next. And the business object to do an inventory receipt will return the transaction record ID. You could populate this and put it into a variable and use it later in your form, but for our purposes, this is not necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and click Finish, and then Close. And now we should have everything to do a basic inventory transaction. Before we do that, so that we know that our transaction works, I'm going to open Agility Explorer. I'm going to go to our inventory master list. And a B cable is a good item, so I'm going to double click that. And that will show me that my location, California, has 1,000 on hand. So now let's go back to Form Studio and press the Simulate Form or the Play button. And it will remind us that we have not saved our form, so we're going to go ahead and say yes to this. And this simulate mode is actually running the form just like a user would see it. The screen over here on the right shows you some variables that are part of the form and can be used for debugging or things at a later time. For now, we're going to enter our B cable, our location of California, and we're going to receive 5. And you'll notice that my button isn't lit up because I have not, my enabling element was the quantity, which I have not entered yet. So I'm going to press Enter. Now my button is lit up, and I'm going to go ahead and click that to do the receive. I don't know if you noticed, but this little green arrow turned red for a brief second while the transaction was happening, which means now that it's green again, the transaction is over. So now let's go back to our Agility grid, and let's click the refresh button, and we should see this quantity on hand change. And now you'll see that we have 1,005, which means our inventory receipt was a success. Now, clearly, this form's lacking a lot of things. There's no validation, there's no lookups, there's other information that you want to include to capture from the user that you might want to pass to the transaction. And we will be expanding on this form over the course of the next several lessons. For now, though, this concludes the lesson on creating a very simple form in Form Studio.